When I first moved into Maplewood Lane, I thought of it as nothing more than a fresh start. After the heartbreak of a long-term relationship ending, I wanted someplace quiet, someplace where I could breathe again. At 34, I felt too young to feel so worn out, but heartache has a way of aging you faster than the years themselves. The street was lovely, lined with maple trees that stretched over the road like old protectors, their branches touching like friends reaching for each other. Neighbors waved when I drove in, and children rode bikes up and down the sidewalks. My house wasn't big, but it was mine. A little white porch, a swing I'd promised myself I would sit on every evening, and enough garden space for flowers I wasn't sure I could keep alive. But the first time I really noticed Thomas, my 60-year-old neighbor, everything about Maplewood Lane began to change. He was sitting on his porch across the narrow strip of grass that separated our houses, a thick book in his hands and a coffee mug resting on the railing. He had silver hair, neatly kept, and eyes that carried both weariness and kindness. When he caught me glancing at him, I quickly looked away, embarrassed at being caught staring. But instead of ignoring me, he smiled. A simple, gentle smile. I smiled back politely and went inside. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Just a neighbor. Just another person I might wave at occasionally. The first few weeks passed quietly. I settled into my job at a local design firm, unpacked boxes, hung curtains, and tried to create order out of the chaos of moving. I wasn't looking for friends. My evenings were spent on my porch, sipping tea and watching the sun go down, finding comfort in the routine. But Thomas noticed me. One evening, when the street was bathed in the soft golden light of sunset, he called across the lawn. "Porch swings are meant to be shared, you know. Care to join me?" I hesitated. Sitting with a stranger, even a neighbor, wasn't something I usually did. But his tone was warm, not pushy. So, I crossed over and sat beside him. The swing creaked as we rocked gently. At first, we exchanged small talk, the weather, the beauty of the maple trees, the quirks of the neighborhood. He told me that he had lived here for over 30 years, raising his children in the very house we were sitting in front of. Then, with a softness in his voice, he mentioned his late wife, Margaret. "She loved this porch," he said quietly. "We used to sit out here every evening, just like this." I glanced at him, unsure what to say. But he didn't look sad, more like someone remembering something precious. I found myself telling him about my own heartbreak, how I had spent years in a relationship that ended suddenly. How I had thought I'd be married by now, maybe even have children, but instead, I had boxes of memories I couldn't look at and a heart that still stung. He listened. Really listened. Not with quick nods or polite interruptions, but with genuine attention. By the time the sky turned to navy blue, I felt lighter. That night, walking back to my house, I thought, that was the first real conversation I've had in months. From then on, our evenings became routine. Sometimes, we talked. Sometimes, we sat in silence. He showed me his garden, the roses Margaret had planted years ago, which he still cared for meticulously. He taught me how to prune them properly, laughing gently at my clumsy first attempts. On weekends, he would bring over small things he had fixed for me. A broken chair from my porch he had repaired, a squeaky hinge he had oiled. "Wood tells you when it wants to be fixed," he said once. "People do too, if you listen closely." That line stayed with me. People in the neighborhood began to notice. Some smiled kindly when they saw us together. Others looked puzzled, whispering behind cupped hands. I was 34. He was 60. To the outside world, it didn't make sense. But I stopped caring what it looked like. What mattered was how I felt when I was around him, safe, understood, even valued. One Saturday afternoon, I found him in his garage workshop. Sawdust covered the floor, tools neatly lined the walls, and he was sanding a piece of oak. He looked up with a grin. "Ever built something with your hands?" he asked. "No," I admitted, laughing nervously. "Well, today's the day." He guided me step by step, letting me hammer nails and smooth rough edges. The project was just a small wooden birdhouse, but when it was finished, I felt an odd sense of pride. He clapped his hand lightly against mine in celebration. "You did good," he said. "Sometimes, it's not about what you build, but what you feel when you're building it." I didn't realize it then, but those words described what was happening between us. One evening, the porch swing felt different. We weren't talking, just rocking side by side, the sound of cicadas filling the air. I glanced at him, at the lines on his face that told stories of years I hadn't lived, and I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something more. Something deeper. It scared me. The next day, I avoided him. I busied myself with errands, worked late, and sat inside instead of on my porch. But Thomas noticed. That evening, he gently knocked on my door. "Everything all right?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes searched mine. I hesitated, then blurted out, "I think I care about you more than I should." I expected him to look shocked, maybe even uncomfortable. Instead, he smiled gently. "Emily," he said softly, "there's no such thing as caring too much when it's real." My heart raced. For the first time in years, I felt seen not as someone broken or too young or too old, but simply as myself. From that moment, our bond grew. We shared meals, stories, and laughter. He taught me lessons about patience, kindness, and resilience, not through lectures, but through the way he lived. At a neighborhood gathering months later, I stood beside him, watching him laugh with old friends. For a moment, I felt self-conscious again. Did we look strange together? But then he caught my eye and gave me that steady smile, the one that always calmed me. And I knew it didn't matter what others thought. What mattered was that we had found something rare. One quiet evening, as the sun set behind the maples, I leaned against him on the porch swing. The roses in his garden swayed gently in the breeze. "I'm glad I sat beside you that evening," I whispered. He placed his hand over mine. "So am I, Emily. So am I." And in that simple moment, I realized love had no rules about age, timing, or expectations. Sometimes, it just arrives, quietly, unexpectedly, and exactly when you need it most.